Miley moved into her new house. For the last 3 years, she was living in a small one-bedroom apartment. She was working really hard to save for a big house. She felt proud of herself when the owner handed her the key to this new house. The house was a bit old, but it was way better than that tiny claustrophobic apartment. Miley parked her car near the house and unlocked the door. The helpers had already moved her stuff. There, it was a busy week for her as she decorated this entire house on her own. As soon as she got inside, she called her mother. "Hello Mom, yes, I finally moved in. I can't wait to show you my house next week," Miley said in an excited voice. After finishing the talk with her mom, she started to look around the house once more. There were 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a basement in the house. She noticed that there was an extra key with the house key. She assumed it was the basement key. Miley hadn't been to the basement of the house earlier. She twisted the key and opened the basement door. The basement had a very odd smell, as if it hadn't been opened for a long time, she said to herself. God, how old is this place? She switched on the light and got down the stairs. The basement was filled with old furniture. There was a beautifully carved almirah standing at the corner of the basement. Miley went close to it and noticed it was well enough for use. She called the helpers and moved the almirah to her room. Miley arranged all her clothes inside it neatly. She always fancied handcrafted furniture like this. She finished arranging her room and finally went to cook her dinner. She was working in the kitchen when she heard a woman's sound. She came back to her bedroom and got shocked like hell. The door of the almirah was wide open. She remembered very well that she closed the door of the almirah earlier. Then how did it get open on its own? She closed the door once again and switched off the room's light. After dinner, Miley was sitting in the living room watching a movie. The hallway was on her right side. At the end of the hallway stood her bedroom. The door of the room was open. Her eyes were hooked on the TV screen when she suddenly felt someone was standing near the bedroom and watching her. As she looked at the bedroom, she noticed a thin, creepy figure went inside her room. Her heart raced in fear. She couldn't think what she would do now. There is no one inside this house except her. Drops of sweat appeared on her forehead. She slowly got up and asked in a terrified voice, "Who is it?" No one answered. She walked towards the room. She was scared, but she had to check her bedroom. As she peeked inside the room, she noticed the dark room. There was no one inside. The windows were closed. It was clear that the room is empty. Still, she switched on the light to look more clearly. There was no one in it at all. She thought to herself that she hallucinated the entire incident. Just when she switched off the light to get back to the living room, her blood in veins turned ice cold. A creepy-looking figure was sitting at the top of the almirah. It had long sharp nails on its fingers. As the nails scratched the almirah, a horrible sound came out of the wooden door of the almirah. Terrified with fear, she immediately switched on the light, but there was no one inside. The room was empty. She again switched off the lights. This time she saw the figure came down and was sitting on the floor near the almirah. Miley could hear its deep, heavy breathing. She again switched on the light, and there wasn't anyone in the room. She couldn't understand what was going on. Her heart was racing like a horse. With trembling hands, she again switched off the lights. What she saw next scared her to sleep. The figure is now standing straight just 2 to 3 hands distance from her. She stood there being numb. Suddenly, this demonic figure stretched its hand and tried to attack her. Miley screamed at the top of her lungs and rushed to the living room in fear. She grabbed her car keys and immediately left the house. That night, she stayed at her friend's house. And the next morning, she left the house. As she went to return the keys to the owner, she told him that due to personal reasons she is shifting to a different area, hence she doesn't need this house anymore. While the owner was returning her money, she asked him in a low voice, "I saw you had a wooden almirah in the basement. Why don't you use it?" The owner's face changed. He replied in a tensed voice that the almirah belonged to his grandfather who died in a stroke. People in his family believed it to be haunted, so they locked it up in the basement. Miley didn't say a single word more, and she never went back to that house ever again. Eddie moved into their new house with his parents. He was extremely excited. This house is way bigger than their previous apartment. It even has a big lake at the back of the house. He liked playing near the lake in the afternoons on holidays. Though his mom told him not to go to the lake alone, Eddie never listened. People hardly go to this lake, maybe that's why it appears more attractive to Eddie. He sits on the bank of the lake and dangles his feet into the still cold water. The water reflects everything like a mirror. Eddie looks at the water and makes faces and ends up laughing on his own. There are long trees surrounding the lake. With the slow wind passing by, Eddie could see those trees moving as if they were dancing. Every holiday afternoon, Eddie secretly sneaks out of the house and comes here. One Sunday, Eddie was standing near the lake and skipping stones into the water. Suddenly, he saw something in the middle of the lake. He tried to look more closely, and what he saw shocked him. There was a hand floating on the lake. The hand was not moving, just floating still. Eddie asked in a surprised voice, "Hey, do you need help?" The hand still didn't move. Eddie asked again, "Hello, can you hear me?" The hand now started to call Eddie by moving its fingers. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind, what if someone is drowning? Eddie ran to the house to call his dad. He bolted inside the house, slamming the door so hard that his mom screamed, "Ed, is that you? Is everything okay?" Eddie said in a panicked voice, "Dad, there's a man drowning in the lake." Eddie's dad was watching TV on the couch. He got up and said, "What? What are you saying?" Eddie went to him and started pulling his hand. "Yes, come on, you have to save him. He called me for help." Eddie and his dad ran to the lake, but by the time they reached it, there was no one to be found. The lake water was still, and the slow wind was passing by. Eddie searched with his curious eyes but didn't see anyone or that mysterious hand. His dad scolded him for coming to the lake alone and making up stories. They went back to the house, and Eddie went to his room with an angry face. He remembers seeing the hand the entire night. Eddie couldn't sleep. He saw a dream around the dawn that he is standing near the lake, and the hand is calling him. After emerging from the water, a week passed by, and Eddie didn't go to the lake. One Sunday afternoon, his dad was away from home. It was just Eddie and his mother in the house. Eddie peeked into his mother's room and saw her sleeping. He then slowly opened the main door and tiptoed out of the house. After closing the door behind him, he ran towards the lake. The lake stood like before. He went close to the water and started searching. He said in a worried voice, "Is there anyone there?" Suddenly, that hand again emerged from the water. This time, the hand was 6 to 7 hands distance from him. Then the hand again started calling him in the same manner. But Eddie felt something very wrong about this entire event. His feet were submerged in the water. He asked, "Who are you? Why aren't you coming out of the water?" But before he could get his answers, something very unexpected happened. The hand rushed to him and grabbed his feet tightly. Eddie fell on the river bank, hitting his head on the mud. He tried to scream, but the hand was already dragging him into the water. He was kicking and trying to free himself to get out of the water, but the hand kept pulling him inside the lake. Eddie was almost under the water when he witnessed a vicious sight. There was a hand sitting under the water. His face was like a skeleton, but his pale skin made him look even more fierce. His long hair was floating inside the water. His skinny body made him look like a creature from another world. Eddie couldn't breathe as the lake water started to choke him. He felt like he's going to die, and this creature would drag him into the deep dark bottom of the lake. Eddie was falling unconscious just when he felt someone dragged him out of the water vigorously. He saw with his blurry vision that his mom was panting and crying. Then everything went black. Eddie woke up with high fever after 2 days. The doctors told him to rest completely. His parents left the house after 1 week. The day when Eddie was leaving the house with his parents, he went to the lake for a few seconds. There was no one there. But suddenly, when he turned around to leave, he heard sounds in the water. He turned back and saw the man took out his head from the water and stared at him with his lifeless eyes. Eddie slowly stepped back and was about to run to his parents when the man emerged his hand from the water and waved him goodbye and went back to the lake. I don't know if you believe in ghosts or not, but I do. I strongly believe. Last night what I saw was not just my imagination. I took the job of the night guard in a small factory. The factory was located out of the township amidst green fields. There was an old graveyard on the opposite side of the factory. Since childhood, I have been a brave child, so the graveyard didn't bother me to take this job. There was a small room in front of the gate of the factory. They gave me the room to spend the night. My room had a small window from which the graveyard was perfectly visible. Last night I was lying on the bed and watching some funny videos on my phone. I kept the window open for ventilation. Even lying on the bed, I could see the empty road and the huge rusty gate of the graveyard. I dozed off while watching videos. Suddenly, I woke up hearing the rusty metal sound. It felt like someone opened the graveyard's gate. I looked at my phone. It was 12 a.m. at night. I got up on the bed to look outside. Surprisingly, the gate of the graveyard was wide open. I thought to myself, who can enter the graveyard at such an hour? But I couldn't see inside the graveyard. Well, I decided to mind my own business and went back to bed. My eyes were almost ready to fall asleep when suddenly I heard a woman's crying voice. The sound was coming from the graveyard. This time I couldn't ignore it anymore, thinking someone might be in trouble. So, I took my flashlight and came out of my room. I opened the factory gate and came out of the premises and started to walk towards the graveyard. The road was empty as very few vehicles use this shortcut. When I reached the graveyard gate, I heard the crying sound once again. I said in a loud voice, "Hello ma'am, is there any problem?" The cry grew louder after I asked the question. I entered the graveyard and flashed my light all around me. The graveyard was really big. Seeing so many graves in front of me gave me goosebumps. I couldn't help but think all these dead bodies were once living people. I couldn't see anyone as far as my eyes went. The crying sound stopped too. I started to walk inside. When I reached the middle of the graveyard, I heard whispering sounds. It felt like 2 to 3 people were talking in a very low voice. I asked again, "Is anybody here?" This time I heard a woman's voice coming from a nearby bush. "Help me," the woman said. I could tell from her voice that she was in terrible pain. I said, "Where are you, ma'am? Are you alright?" The woman again said in the same voice, "Help me, I can't get up." I gave her my hand to help her stand up. As she grasped my hand, I could see her pale, dirty fingers. Also, her hand felt extremely cold. After she stood up, I could see half of her face as the other half was still covered with her black hair. She looked at me in with her big wide eye and said, thank you. I replied awkwardly, do you want me to call the cops? Where do you stay? She looked at the graveyard and replied, I am looking for my fiancé. Have you seen him? No one outside of the factory believed my story, but I know what I saw that night. I am never going back to that place ever again.